Here's what spurred this for me, right? Baylor is not playing Texas Tech this fall. And that feels really weird to me. It feels really bizarre, and in a way I would say it feels wrong. And I don't think I would ever say Texas Tech is like a high-key rival of Baylor. I don't think either school feels that way, but with other Texas schools departing the conference, like this has become a matchup I look forward to every single season. And so I have a proposal, and I'm going to put it on the screen here, and then I want your honest reaction to this proposal. This is the proposal. I think the Big 12, for the sake of keeping some of these traditional things together, needs to go to 4-team pods where they're all guaranteed to play each other every season in conference play. So the way Scotty would do it, if I could propose this to the Big 12, this is what my pods would look like. We'd have the Big 12 North, which would essentially be the Big 12 North from like 2010, 2009, right? You got Colorado, Kansas, Iowa State, and Kansas State. You'd have the Big 12 South, which would be Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State, and Texas Tech. The East would be Cincinnati, UCF, West Virginia, and Houston, which are essentially the American Conference teams, which got into the Big 12, plus West Virginia. And then the West would be, the Utah schools and the Arizona schools. That just makes way too much sense to me. Here's what that looks like on a map. And I want to acknowledge, Shehan, before I get your take, I know this is weird for Houston. Like, I understand that is what I would call maybe the flaw, if there is one in this plan, but that just works so much better to me than trying to get Oklahoma State somewhere weird. What do you do with, it's just weird when you have three schools that are clearly East, and who else do you kind of throw over there? But that's how Scotty would arrange the Big 12. What's your reaction to that idea?
Yeah, the first reaction is definitely that Houston fans are going to be incredibly, incredibly mad whenever they see this graphic, because the whole point of them moving back to the Big 12 was getting to play these other Texas schools and was getting to deal with these ex-Southwest Conference rivals. Now, of course, Oklahoma State has been a much bigger brand over the past 20 years. So, for example, as somebody who obviously, like yourself, is a graduate of one of these schools that's been a legacy team, sure, I understand why a Baylor graduate might want to play Oklahoma State instead.
Well, and not only that, Shehan, but I've heard the Southwest Conference thing, the Southwest Conference. First of all, nobody wants Rice back in the same league as all these schools. So the Southwest Conference lovers, I'm kind of out on that. Second of all, the Big 12 was formed in February of 1994. I was a year and a half old. So to me, and I'll let you continue, but to me, Oklahoma State belongs with Baylor and Texas Tech in a pod way more than Houston does. That was part of my logic as well. But continue.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, for Oklahoma State fans, I'm sure they get it. Now, at the same time, the other thing that you look at, though, is that if you're adjusting a little bit, you could have just a Pac-12 pod, right? With the legacy Pac-12 schools. You could also have a little bit more of, like you said, Oklahoma State was a Big 8 team with those other teams that are in the Northern pod. So there are different ways to approach it. I think that when you're talking about schools, if you look at that map, right, Iowa State is further east, certainly, than Houston is, even though Iowa State obviously has their historic ties with Kansas and Kansas State. But this is the complication of all of this, right? Is you almost as a league have to figure out who exactly are you screwing in the process. Now, this is the case as well with the protected rivalries. And I think that actually the protected rivalries that we have in some ways expose some of the complication of this modern Big 12, which is Oklahoma State. They don't have a rival anymore, right? Their rival plays in another conference. Texas Tech doesn't have a true rival the same way that Baylor TCU is, the way that Utah BYU is, the way that Arizona State is. And that's complicating. Now, I think that there's also ways to obviously try to build some things long-term to create new rivalries, especially if some of these schools that have some Cincinnati and West Virginia is a perfect example. I think that long-term, maybe that's something that develops into a really nice rivalry because of the geographic proximity and also with their history in the Big East as well. So I think that there's some merit here, but it does get really complicated when you start being like, man, you got 4 Texas schools, but we don't want one of them because we don't want to elevate them the same way that we do the other 3 Texas schools.
Yeah. I know as soon as I'm drawing this up, I'm like, this is not fair to Houston. To me, it's not about elevating. It's just about it's tradition at this point for me. It's like like Big 12.
But like you had for example, right? Like Andre Ware was playing against Baylor and TCU, right? Like he was playing against these schools in the state. And I get it, right? All respect to my good friends over at Rice University. No one's asking for Rice to be back. But that doesn't mean that all the rest of the other teams that have these long-standing relationships matter, right? The reason, for example, that we're talking about Baylor not playing Texas Tech anymore, and we're not talking about Baylor not playing West Virginia or whoever, I think they do get West Virginia, but that's beside the point, is because Baylor and Texas Tech have been playing since the 70s, since they were both members of the Southwest Conference. The reason that we talk about Baylor and TCU as a rivalry is because they've been playing since the 1900s, right? Because of their legacy and because for them too, they were members long-term of the Southwest Conference. So I get it. And now, actually, I think that one other thing to factor in there is, if you wanted to do it a little differently, is actually if there's a team in Texas that has some history with some other schools, Texas Tech with the Arizona schools actually has some history as members of previous conferences. Obviously, Texas Tech, a Texas school, they would want to play against the other Texas schools, but they also have history playing Arizona and Arizona State. I can't remember what the conference was called back in the day, but they were a member of a conference together at one point. So it all gets very complicated, and you do, again, as a league, you almost have to build winners and losers into this process because of it. But I also do think, I'll tell you what, like, we went to school in the mid-2010s when the Big 12 was a 10-team league and you played a full round robin. I mean, look, nothing's ever going to hit the same as that. Like, it's just not, right? Like, there's never going to be anything that's as cool as knowing. Like, for me right now, I'm putting together some of my projections for the Big 12, and I'm having to be like, well, who plays who? Like, do you have an easy schedule? Do you have a hard schedule? Well, like, the old Big 12, you played everybody. And yeah, you got certain teams on the road and some certain teams at home, but there wasn't we don't even have to play Oklahoma. We don't even have to play Arizona State or BYU or whoever. And I mean, I think you even look last year at, or maybe 2 years ago is the better example, where Oklahoma State, who maybe isn't all that great a team, manages to go all the way to playing in the Big 12 title game because of their schedule. Like, it's reality. But I wish it wasn't the case at the same time.
No, you're spot on. Well, and it's also reality that we don't know what any of these teams are actually going to be. Arizona State was picked last season, right? And then, yeah, they were one play away at multiple points from beating Texas and getting into a college football semifinal. So you just never know in this league. So here's the question, and you've thrown out a couple ideas, but just because I went ahead and just put my proposal on the table, how would you organize the Big 12? Would you just leave it the way it is? Would you be in favor of divisions or pods, or if you could design it any way you wanted, what would you do with these teams?
Yeah, it's really complicated. That's the first thing that I'll say, right? There isn't, I don't think, a good way to do a 16-team conference. What I will say is I think that whatever model you pick, I think that I probably would lean towards a divisionless model, but I think that there are merits to a division-based model. But the biggest thing that I'd say is that I would want to see consistent adjustment to the model. And what I mean by that is right now we don't know, like you said, over the next 5 years, we don't know who's going to be good long term, right? We don't know who's going to, because there just isn't, right? You kind of know when you're setting up the SEC, like there are these teams that have track record. There really isn't much track record for anybody in this new Big 12 for good and bad reasons, right? So what I would want is, let's just say hypothetically that we do a divisional setup. Well, I'd want the divisions to be adjusted every 3 to 5 years based on the previous results of the past 3 years, let's say, right? Where you have a little bit of a rolling understanding of like, this is where this team has been. Now, again, like that doesn't protect you from Arizona State going from last place to first place, but I think that it does create a little bit more of a big picture balance to where, okay, you're playing in this divisional setup, and ultimately, though, you know it's going to be like you're not going to have an overbalanced side of the conference, right? You're not going to have an SEC West to an SEC East where it just makes the conference title game a joke historically, right? So that would be the biggest thing that I'd say, and I think that should be true even if you do a divisional setup or sorry, a division-less setup. I think that you should still have sort of a schedule built around the idea of let's try to balance things the best that we can. And you're never going to be perfect, and that's not the point, but at least you have some sort of idea of like, hey, you know what? There's not just one team who's missing everybody year in and year out, and there's not just one team who's getting everybody every single year.
That's a great idea. That's a really, really interesting way to look at it. And I think the only issue I have with that is part of my pod's proposal was to maintain some of those regional traditional matchups. Whereas if you're just doing divisions based on results, you could lose Baylor TCU, right? But B, I was thinking about this as you were talking. In the aughts, there was a period of time where like Nebraska had kind of fallen off and Colorado had fallen off. And so you actually knew that whoever won the Big 12 South was going to win the conference, right? Baylor, frankly, was the only team that wasn't competitive during that time. Tech had some years with Mike Leach. Texas A&M had some years. Texas and Oklahoma were always right there. Oklahoma State had a couple times, right? And you almost kind of knew the Big 12 South champ would be the champ, whether they faced Mizzou or Nebraska or whoever else in the conference title game. And I actually think that was kind of fun. So you can have competitive juice, I think, either way.